I'm really grateful to Joe and the CamRARE team for allowing us to present this panel on cell and gene therapies. So, cell and gene therapies, well, it's the buzzword, right? We've been hearing a lot about this new modality of treatment that's going to transform the opportunity for patients to get better outcomes, for the healthcare system to be able to deliver those outcomes, and it's supposed to be the best thing since sliced bread. But of course, they're not a pill, are they? We all seem to think that once an ATMP or a cell and gene therapy has been given a regulatory approval and gone through the NICE process and you've got big ticks everywhere, we can all turn up at our local clinician's clinic and say, can I have one please? But actually you can't. And this panel is going to be talking a little bit about the complexities of manufacturing these, then putting in infrastructure, particularly for the NHS and other service providers, to enable them to be ready to deliver these therapies. And I'm really pleased to have a brilliant panel talking to us today about some of those complexities and really explaining why it's not as easy as opening the door to your clinician's office and saying, can I have one please? So I'd like to welcome Fiona Marley, Head of Highly Specialised Commissioning at NHS England, to really set the scene for us in terms of what that means for the NHS, what they've been doing and what are the remaining challenges. Thanks, Fiona.
I'm just going to introduce this session and then I've got some brilliant colleagues who are going to talk about other aspects of this area. So I thought I'd start with just a few facts and figures. So NHS England has been commissioning these advanced medicinal products since 2016. So far we've commissioned 12 across 14 different indications. There are 20 expert centres delivering them. And we reckon that there's 36 in 34 indications coming within the next 3 years. Although there's a bit of a caveat on that because sometimes there's quite a high attrition rate and sometimes the trials don't go as anticipated and they don't all get to the market. We've got 700 plus patients treated a year, so far 3,000 in total. And the most important ones are something called CAR-T. Those are the biggest numbers that tend to treat people who've got blood cancers. Few other facts and figures, just to say that actually the UK is not doing too badly here. So very recent data, April, showed that the UK was third in the G20 for availability of medicines. Launch of a new medicine in the UK half the time of the European average. And then separate data, again, fairly recent, said UK third globally in the number of medicines commercialised within 1 year of their first approval. And I guess my job at NHS England is making sure that there's a service to deliver the treatment. So that's my job. My colleagues negotiate with drug companies, but I'm there and my team is about making it happen, making sure we've got those expert providers, or hospitals, sorry. Try not to use acronyms and jargon. So how do we do it? So we've got really detailed horizon scanning. We're lucky now that there's indications where there's more than one product coming through. One of my colleagues might mention that later, but in Duchenne, we've got several gene therapies potentially. One of the titles of this was about collaboration. So we have really early collaboration with companies. One of the things I really wanted to do, and we've now got in place, is a template that we fill in jointly to understand if there's complexities in delivery. Do we need a new gene test? One of the services I was involved in, not a gene therapy, needed a really complex delivery model with, injections into the spine. And actually that's really quite difficult to deliver and you need people who know what they're doing. So we try and get in there much sooner. I'll come on to talk about collaboration with patient groups, but that's really important as well. What do they think about the model? And we've also got engagement in something called ATMP Engage, which is a patient and other stakeholder group. We sometimes have to select hospitals to deliver these services, so they've got to have that technical expertise in delivery of the product, but they've also got to be really expert in the condition. You've got to bring those two things together. And I guess just a couple of other things to mention, because it's been quite a theme today, is that if you look on the NHS England website, we've actually got some guidance for virtual clinics for patients who've got rare and multi-system disorders. And I also wanted to let you know that we've now got rare disease collaborative networks. We've got 18 of them now. They're not commissioned services, but they get an NHS logo, which allows you to recognise them, that they're expert in what they do and that they're very research active. So definitely take a look at those. That set of networks is expanding. I just want to talk a little bit about working with patient groups, and I think there is someone from SMA UK who possibly I haven't met in the audience today, but I commissioned services to deliver 3 SMA treatments, and it was very important for us to establish that line of communication with, in fact, 3 different patient groups. We have regular meetings. It means that those groups can pass frank advice on to us about what's the community thinking, about what's going on. And it means I don't get 50 different emails. You know, they're linking with their community and letting me know what's happened. And it also means that I can give them probably quite technical information, and they can translate it into something that the community can actually understand. So, you know, we've done things like webinars. I recorded a webinar last week that's going out to the SMA community. And also, I think, as Sheila alluded to, it's really important that we set realistic expectations about what these treatments can do. They're not necessarily wonder drugs, and it's really important that there's really clear information, and patient groups can help us do that. Final slide, here you are, you've got a news story here about the fact that we've had those 3 drugs for SMA, means that it's a completely different life options now for children with SMA type 1. And I've got some other examples there, Libmeldy, which my colleague and 2 colleagues in fact have been involved in, the one for SMA, and then, you know, for lymphoblastic leukemia. So that's hopefully that is 5 minutes, was it?
Perfect, thank you.
Right.
So I'm Emma Green, I'm a CamRARE trustee, and in my day job I also am managing director of Akmazo Health. But I'm really here just to introduce this wonderful panel of speakers. So Karen Harrison is from the Alex, the leukodystrophy charity. Karen, from a patient standpoint, obviously advanced therapies are now entering the market and more to come. They bring hope, but what are the barriers for patients to access this treatment?
Yeah, they absolutely bring so much hope to our families where, you know, historically there's been no hope at all. So as a charity, we support a rare condition called leukodystrophy, which affects the white matter of the brain and the spinal cord, affect all age groups, boys and girls, or males and females, and most notably children. Now, out of the 100 leukodystrophies, we have treatment for 2. And Fiona just mentioned Libmeldy for metachromatic leukodystrophy, and there has been a patient has been treated, and it was very successful. However, that child could only have treatment because her sister had been diagnosed too symptomatic for treatment. So it's fantastic that all these wonderful treatments are coming on board, but we also need to think about how we're going to identify the children and the adults who need this treatment, especially as most of them, you need to actually sort of identify the person in the early course of the disease. Now, there was clinical trial for gene therapy for adrenal leukodystrophy, and we had a couple of patients went through the treatment at Great Ormond Street, and it all went very, very well. There were several trial sites around the world. The Bluebird Bio, the pharma company, started the process of looking into talking to NICE, and then for various different reasons they withdrew from the UK and Europe. this was such a huge blow for our families. So we still have bone marrow transplantation, which can treat ALD, but it's not everyone can have a bone marrow transplant if you haven't got a good match. It can be a really tricky treatment. And in fact, one of our families chose to have gene therapy through the trial because their elder son had had a really bad outcome from a bone marrow transplant for adrenal leukodystrophy, and in fact he's passed away. So there's lots of other things to think about around these fantastic treatments. You know, as Fiona said, it's not just a pill. And I know that a lot of our families have thought that it's actually quite a simple treatment. So they don't perhaps understand, you know, the weeks and weeks of being in hospital and, you know, the extensive chemotherapy that you may have to have. So it's educating, and it's great to hear that, you know, Fiona and the team, the NHS England team, are reaching out to patient groups and helping us to understand, so that then we can disseminate the information to our families so that, you know, they're well prepared. I think the other thing to think about is that families are often willing to do anything to help their loved one. So even although it feels like it's a really huge treatment and people might think, gosh, you know, I'm not sure if I would do that. Actually, when you're in that position, I'm a mum of 2 boys who were diagnosed with adrenal leukodystrophy, and I would have done anything to try and help them. I think there's also a bit of a fear of gene therapy. So much as it's exciting, there's also a fear of what the future will look like after you've had the treatment.
Thank you so much, Karen. Darren Walsh, General Manager for Therapeutics. The theme today is about collaboration, as Fiona said. How do you foster collaboration with patient groups, with healthcare providers and the regulatory agencies to streamline the introduction of any new advanced therapies?
Yeah, thank you. So there's 3 key elements, and I'll probably start with access. Firstly, it's access from a regulatory perspective. So bench to bedside is a term we probably use 10 to 15 years. You have to work with clinical stakeholders, but patient organisations and patients that say clinical endpoints. What do they mean? Quality of life. What does it mean for us? So when you design your clinical trials, patients should be at the forefront and carers as well. You also have access. So from a HTA perspective, patient organisations are critical. For Libmeldy, there was 3 elements that really stood out. One was an organisation of a patient caregiver survey, which demonstrated the cost and the economic benefit. Secondly was the demonstration of committee meetings. They presented at committee meetings, they articulated the condition, and they absolutely helped the committee understand not just the clinical benefit, but also the emotional burden. And they did that by a caregiver survey and a publication. So they quantified and they did a qualitative and quantitative assessment, which then we could put figures into a cost economic model. And also they demonstrated from a qualitative perspective the impact it had on them as carers and as patients. And the third thing they did was quite innovative. They do it in the US a lot, but a compelling patient impact video. So if you imagine NICE as a committee, they're generalists, experts, but they don't know what metachromatic leukodystrophy is. And when they came to it, for example, they read at the clinical, but the patient impact video really helped contextualise and understand what it meant for carers, what it meant for patients, and potentially this gene therapy, this science fiction treatment, what it could mean potentially curative to a devastating, irreversible condition. So I think for those 3 elements, it was really important that they got that articulation as well. So critical from that perspective. When we talk about qualifying a treatment centre, and I think Fiona's talked about this, there are 6 treatment centres globally. to treat metachromatic leukodystrophy. We're incredibly fortunate that one of those is Manchester Children's Hospital. The clinical experts there are not only equipped, but willing to take on another service. And it's not just that, the payers, so NHS England, have to be willing to commission that service. So you go through qualifying a treatment centre, what does that actually mean for access? From a manufacturer's perspective, it means 12 to 18 months. You have to engage with the site. You know they can treat from a accreditation perspective, so for bone marrow transplantation, there's something called JACE accreditation. Now, the manufacturer then works with them from a product training perspective, understanding the patient information and understanding the administration of a complex therapy. And where you get to is you have a site and centre, and I think Manchester's a great example, you have to train all of the staff. You are talking 45 to 50 individuals that can be in theatre at any time. It's not the clinicians, it's not the nurses, it's all of the staff. So not only as a manufacturer do you have to organise and coordinate that, as a site and a centre they have to be willing and able to release that time as well. And remember, they may treat 3 to 4 patients a year, yet give up a disproportionate amount of time to do this. So you qualify the site, you do the treatment centre, you then have 2 other elements that are critical. Contracts. Firstly, quality contract. You have to establish administration, pharmacovigilance, safety, everything else. And if you imagine a complex gene therapy, you take the cells, you ship them off, they have to be to a European site in 24 hours. They then sit there and cell collection happens, then they have to be shipped back a couple of months later, be infused into a patient, which is usually a young child, cryopreserved. You then have to handle carriers, DHL, packaging, lab, storage, infusion. All of these elements are incredibly complex. So you do the quality, and then you do the supply agreement, which is about payment. Will the centre, and how do they receive payment from NHS England for the patient, the therapy, and the follow-up? And these take 12 to 18 months as a manufacturer, and that's quite good going. And the final thing I would say is we have to think about follow-up, real-world data. In a clinical setting and clinical trials, you do it from a regulatory perspective. From a commercial perspective, you have to follow up these patients carefully to see that it works outside of clinical trial settings. So from an access perspective, those are the 3 components.
Thank you, Darren. So introducing Wendy Kane, who is the partner for rare disease at Roche. Wendy, how are you using your patient-centric focus for advanced therapies? And what are the challenges you see ahead?
Always a really, really good question. I think in terms of, if I was to say in terms of the challenges, the word that would go beside that is complexity. And it's complexity both from the family's perspective and also the complexities of bringing an ATMP or a gene therapy treatment to the first patient that's being treated within the NHS in the UK. There's a huge journey that goes from the first time that a scientist goes eureka in the laboratory right through to that first patient with a rare disease being treated. And it's a very long journey, but there are some hurdles and challenges that we know that we've got at the moment. One of those, as Darren pointed out, is the access perspective. And I just want to focus on the specific element of access that is a huge challenge for gene therapies. They're a one-time treatment. They are complex to administer and complex to contract with. And they also need a lot of follow-up. They are very, very costly in terms of both the clinical trial and the development process as well as the manufacturing. So they're not an easy treatment to actually negotiate from an access perspective with NICE or with SMC. So the question really is do we really see that we've got those access routes to bringing a treatment into the NHS? Are they suitable and fit for purpose to have that route through? We've got 2 pillars that work, either the highly specialised technology route or the HST or the HTA route. And It's about some of the rare diseases. Unfortunately, those routes at the moment don't consider all the elements of the complexity of bringing those treatments to a small population within the UK. And we've obviously heard of the challenges that were faced by Bluebird, but we've not yet found solutions to those yet. The other side then is around the capacity within the NHS. Do we actually have enough skills, capabilities and services in place to deliver all of the gene therapies that Fiona had identified earlier? Yes, there's a large number in development. Not all of those will make it over the line and into the NHS. However, there are lots. There was a white paper published last month by Catapult, and hopefully jumping ahead of you, by Catapult in conjunction with DMD, the DMD Hub, and also Newcastle University. And they did identify, in terms of capacity within the NHS, both education as well as the practical physical capacity of the infrastructure that is needed. We've identified that in the paediatric space, there are probably only 11 centres in the UK that have got the infrastructure to infuse a paediatric patient with the gene therapy. And that's either in the clinical setting or in clinical trial settings. And we need to make sure that we can expand on that so that we can deliver all of the clinical, the gene therapies that potentially can bring hope to families. And the last piece that I want to bring out is in terms of coordination of care. And again, this was one, it's both highlighted in the rare disease framework and again brought to the fore in the recent white paper. However, we have got some fantastic best practice here in the UK. And I do have to say, fantastic Fiona and her team working with SMA UK and the SMA patient organisations have brought about a brilliant example of both the national multidisciplinary team and then also making sure that there was really very tight communication and managing families' expectations around when different cohorts would be treated. However, we would love to be able to make sure that we can build on that, and hopefully we'll be able to do that if we're able to bring gene therapies into the Duchenne space. And finally, I think what would be the solution to this, and I think we need to just put that partnership element in place, and the partnership is literally thinking about all of the stakeholders that need to be brought around the table. And I know I wouldn't want necessarily to hark back to our COVID days, but we did come together from industry to academia to patients to the NHS to the government, and we had a task force and we managed to do it. So why can't we do it now? So that's one of our goals in Roche, is to see if we can lobby, see if we can push to actually bring a task force in place so that we can look at all the challenges that both Darren and our colleagues here on the stage have kind of gone through at the moment.
Thank you, Wendy. So our next panelist is Willingham. She's the head of ATTC Network Coordination, I'll get that right eventually, from the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult. What are the services delivery challenges that the ATTC have identified, and what are you still doing to address them?
Well, thanks very much. A pleasure to be here. I'll just give you some context about what the ATTC, or Advanced Therapy Treatment Centres, are. So back in 2018, the ATTC network was established with Innovate UK funding, and it was to find innovative solutions to the complex and unique challenges that advanced therapies present to the NHS in terms of their clinical adoption. There are 3 hubs that form the ATTC network, one called Northern Alliance, one IMATCH, and one Midlands and Wales ATTC. And they work together and coordinated by the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult to develop systems and processes that will enable patients to access these medicines at scale. And that's quite a challenge. So one of the things that we looked at as a network was institutional readiness, which is actually how many hospitals were really ready for delivery of these therapies. And I think the advent of CAR-Ts really accelerated that. But there are a lot of hospitals that probably could be delivering ATMPs that are nowhere near to that yet. And although I think on a UK perspective we are doing well in terms of the adoption of the medicines we've got to date, there's this brilliant slide where you can see the sort of galaxy of products that are coming down the pipeline, and how are we going to go from treating the hundreds of patients that we are now to the thousands that we aspire to. So one of the things that we did as a network was develop a readiness toolkit, so lots of resources, around 270 resources, which were developed as a result of NHS, industry and public sector collaboration that are readily available for any NHS organisation to access. So it could be something simple like, how do we make the internal business case to senior management that we actually want to deliver a service, all the way through to, I really need a job description for a clinical trial coordinator that specialises in ATMPs. And anyone who's worked in the NHS may realise that actually just getting a job description developed and evaluated is actually quite a challenge in itself. So there was a lot of work in terms of standardisation of processes, because what the NHS can't really, or hasn't got the capacity to do, is to develop different processes for every new product that comes through. And we work with industry to see where we can actually simplify that, so that for every new product, does it need the different IT system? What data needs to be gathered? There's many things that need to be considered there. But it could just come down to, is there capacity to take that patient material to send it off to the manufacturer? Or is that site very, very stretched already? And we've done a piece of work recently around apheresis capacity that suggests that we really need to focus on that in terms of the new products coming through. I did want to mention, I've already given a minute away, so actually I'm going to run out of time, because I gave Fiona a minute of my time. I wanted to mention about some work we've done with Health Education England, developing e-learning modules which are available for all NHS staff and around specific things for ATMP. So there's 13 modules that are available there. And I'm also involved in the ATMP Engage Patient and Public Involvement Engagement group, which is a fantastic group of UK-based stakeholders. I see some of my colleagues in the audience, so I've got to give them a shout out. So Genetic Alliance UK, Nick Mee co-chairs that with me, and one of our public our PPVs, Lawrence Willard, is in the audience too. So if you have an interest in any activities around PPIE that specifically focus on ATMPs, then you'd be very welcome to speak to us afterwards and get engaged with that. Right, on that point, I'm going to sign off because I'm nearly out of time, so thank you for that.
Thank you. So last but not least, Paul Selby, who's a clinical pharmacy lead of East Genomics. Hi, Paul. Advanced therapies, we've talked, have got unique storage, handling and administration requirements. How are you handling that?
Yeah, so I think you've heard from the panel just how complex some of this is, and you've heard phrases like pharmacovigilance, you've heard phrases like cryopreservation. So really, wow, the complexity is around how do we get these products in, and how do we look after them safely, how do we administer them at the right time. So within pharmacy and a lot of these centres, we have that expertise and knowledge already. It's developed over time and with those skills. In particular, we do a lot of storage of medicines, not a lot under 150 degrees Celsius, but we do a lot of storage of medicines and that pharmacovigilance, which basically means we're making sure that their use is safe. I wanted to give two examples to sort of just identify the breadth or the range that we have to consider when we're thinking about gene therapies as a whole. And so if you were to look at a CAR T-cell therapy like Yescarta, you could be looking at harvesting the cells 3 to 4 weeks, and then manufacturing process of 3 to 4 weeks. The storage is less than 150 degrees Celsius, so it's really difficult to achieve and requires specialist storage, often done in conjunction with cellular therapies labs because they are cells. And then you have to thaw them and administer them with half an hour to then give that to the patient. So it's incredibly important to have everything in place to deliver that, so that when your patient comes, you can get it and it all works smoothly, it matches with other therapies, and that it's given safely. So there's 14 centres in the UK, which is pretty good, actually, I think, to have all those facilities in place. And then if we looked at something like Zolgensma, which is an in vivo gene therapy, transport is at minus 60 degrees Celsius. So again, we're talking, really deep frozen, but it can be stored in the fridge for 2 weeks. So you get slightly different logistics, and actually there's much more importance there, where you might be ordering vials and getting the right amount of product. And in particular, when these are quite expensive, a small clerical error can make a big difference to budgets. So the final point I wanted to make on this was really how this all fits in with the model at the moment. So for the patient journey, and in terms of what we sort of want to achieve for patients, a lot of the prescribing will be done by specialists. A lot of the administration will be done in centres where those specialists are based. And that is not brilliant when we're thinking about patient delivery, because it means you've got a few centres where people have to travel to, you're adding in barriers, and you're making it much more difficult. You've then got to think about some of the monitoring requirements of some of these therapies. So some of them would require close monitoring, where you might have to have an inpatient stay, or certainly be reviewed over a period of time. And again, a lot of the therapies will need long-term follow-up, and that's incredibly important as we learn how the therapies have an impact across a person's life. So there is a real balance to be had here, I think. I think we need to have those specialist centres, and I think by and large we have the expertise and the skills in the NHS to deliver that. Sadly, it is in sort of specialist niche places at the moment, which is not good. But actually there is an argument that if you've got a therapy that you only need once, and we can sort out making sure that the monitoring and the ongoing support is delivered close to patients' care or via telemedicine, however best, then that would actually achieve the same aim. So hopefully, to finish on a slightly positive point, yes, I think that the NHS has the skills and the expertise. I think we have the right staff groups doing the right work. We've got excellent pharmacy staff, excellent nurses, excellent clinicians. We do have a risk as we increase the number of products, both in terms of increasing complexity, because with every product you get different requirements, but also in terms of the capacity to be able to provide everyone who needs the treatment. And that's the point, I think, when you need to look at which centres need to be able to provide it and how you upskill those at that time.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I'll hand over to Sheila. I think we've got about 10 minutes for discussion and questions.
Brilliant, fantastic. So I'm sure you've got lots of questions, but whilst you're all thinking of them, I've got one question particularly for our industry experts. So we've heard a lot from the panel about the kind of complexities. Paul's articulated how difficult it is to have different products that have different requirements for storage and transport and so on. What is the industry doing to try and create some more standardisation so that we can start to be a bit more efficient in this, and to help people like Paul make this a much more easier process in terms of what he's trying to do?
Good question. Very complex question. I suppose it's always very difficult. We, in terms of saying we want to bring the right treatment and ensure that we've got the best opportunity to make sure that that's feasible and could go through the both in terms of making sure that it's effective and also ensure that it obviously has a good safety profile. In terms of then thinking about the complexities of the delivery, of how we produce the treatments and the complexity of storage, that all aligns with the molecule. And it's a challenge. And, I'm sorry you need a fridge that's so cold. And also as well in terms of, we're always trying to make sure in terms of, obviously I can only speak for Roche, but in terms of what we are trying to do is to make sure that we can look at overcoming some of the challenges that are there in both the supply and the preparation elements of this. And it's one of the things in terms of that I've had back from the clinicians, is that actually the actual administration of a gene therapy is actually very low key. It's a bit of a deflation in terms of, because all of the the high pressured, all of the very complex elements are behind the scenes. So I suppose all we can do is make sure that we can do our best, make sure that we can bring each treatment with the right supply chain, the right access route, with the right amount of opportunity to make it as easy within the NHS as possible, with the key focus of bringing a treatment to a patient and bringing that hope and bringing that hopefully life-changing impact.
Thanks. Darren, did you want to ask?
Yeah, I'm smiling to myself, I'm sorry. So we're a very small organisation. There's me, one person in the field and a medical director. So this took up an inordinate amount of time. First thing, we walked into Manchester and they shouted at us, "We are having no more printers." And I was like, what is this? We've had 5 companies, 5 printers, there's no space. So I was like, okay. So first thing is listen to the organisation or the centre or the site. What do they need? What's their limitations? And what are their barriers? Because genuinely, if they had any more printers, they were willing to walk away. It was that much of a sort of a surprise. The second thing is, from a contractual perspective, we worked with a fantastic individual. You had to find the right person, from finance director to CEO. We got down to a wonderful individual who was doing a master's in contracting and law at the time. And what I would say, we were a pioneer, and what they did is he wrote a contractual pilot, a sort of a pilot of a contract template that he could use with all future companies. So as we went through, and there was a caveat of conditioning and supply and transport and things that could go wrong and everything you could imagine, it was laborious and it was really complicated. But as he was helping us so much, we said we want this to future-proof you for other therapies and other companies. And the final thing was simple things like suppliers, like DHL or whoever else. We worked with other companies and said, who are you using? Because we don't want 5 couriers turning up with different process and different procedures. So we tried to, the administration, the collection and the couriers. So I'd say in summary, listen to your partners. These are the people that are making it possible, and ensure that you can simplify where possible.
Thank you. This is a question, I guess, thinking about patient access in the future. And we talked about how there's a lot of one-time therapies coming through in clinical development, which is really exciting. And if some of these therapies are able to deliver what we hope, these are going to be incredibly effective treatments, possibly cures. I don't know if we can say that or not. But I'm sort of thinking, in order to be able to sort of justify the price point, and also the fact that it is a one-time treatment, not a chronic treatment, so it's typically a sort of a one-off payment, how can we try and ensure that there's a sufficient patient follow-up? Because if you're a patient and you're treated very early, maybe pre-symptomatically, and then you go on and have almost a normal life, let's say, why would you want to come back to your physician every year and get a checkup if you feel well? But if they don't want to do it, then how can you justify the longevity of these treatments in order to pave the way for the next generation of treatments?
So that is an excellent question. I think that families are very engaged with the process. I think that rare disease families, we're a community, and you're aware of what could happen if you didn't have the treatment. So I certainly think that, there's always families who are lost to follow-up, but I would hope that the families are so engaged that they would want to help. We often hear families saying, even if it doesn't help my child or my loved one, if it helps someone in the future, then I'm willing to do it. So I hope that, they would continue that engagement.
Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, just thinking about that and equity of access more generally, I think one of the things that we're aware of is that there are lots of reasons why patients don't get equitable access to healthcare treatments. And thinking about how you do the follow-up for these particular patients, do they need to go back to the main treatment centre, which might require them to travel quite a long way, or is it possible to set up a local centre or even the GP or whatever, so that they don't have that burden of taking time off work and all the things that actually impact people's lives from a day-to-day sort of perspective.
Emma, did you want to?
Oh no, I was just going to say we can take another question.
Can I just add to that, very importantly, engagement with the patient organisations, the charities, the carers that are going to fill it out. And I won't name the company, but I work for an organisation that designed the best online platform you've ever seen and spent a lot of money and a lot of time, but didn't ever check the interface and the willingness to use. So to answer your point, if people aren't buying into it, the end user, it's going to be redundant anyway.
I think we've got another question.
Yes, COVID vaccines put RNA therapeutics very much up the pecking order, in my opinion. And I just wondered where the UK sits in terms of manufacturing, commissioning and distribution through the patient pathway of RNA therapeutics, some of which could be one-off vaccines, some of which could be repeat treatments.
It's a really good question. I don't know who might be able to. Paul, are you volunteering?
Yeah, rather foolishly perhaps. But so I think the COVID vaccines were they're a brilliant example of how we adjusted the way we worked. And got the experience of those storage. My feeling is that we're probably in a reasonable place to probably start those discussions in earnest. And I think one of the advantages of the structures that we have in place in the NHS is that when it's well commissioned, we often have some skills and some expertise that can build on that, and we're quite good at thinking about doing a little before we do a lot. So I think we're in a good place. I'll be honest, my experience in that field is limited, but certainly we have all that technical and expertise, I think, within the hospital. So I think it doesn't pose too much of a threat, but it would definitely be a challenge to make sure it's done right.
I suppose the other angle to think about, Fiona, I might ask you to talk a little bit about the horizon scanning function that we have at NHS England and how that would equip us to be prepared for what might be coming.
Yeah, so we employ an organisation called SBS who do the horizon scanning for us. The bit that I'm involved in is about drugs essentially, but it does mean that they can look, years away and think what's coming through. They can look by indication, or they can look by drug, because sometimes we have a drug that actually is suitable for lots of different indications. That's a different discussion again. We have a monthly meeting with them, or they can do like a deep dive. So they did a deep dive on Duchenne, because it's not only gene therapies for Duchenne, there's other products coming along. One of the things I've learned about working on particular conditions is that I never ever try and guess what's important to patients and families, because invariably I get it wrong. And if I talk to Duchenne people, they say the worst thing is the steroids, and the impact of the steroids. So, for something like Duchenne, it's about looking at the gene therapies, it's about looking at the other products, but it does mean we've got a really good idea of what's coming through. So in advance of things going to NICE, if something's going to be really complicated to deliver, so I was talking about intrathecal capacity. I'm involved in another drug that's coming through that needs intrathecal capacity, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, it's potentially a great drug, but we're going to have to find places that can give intrathecal injections to people once a month, which is, really, but that horizon scanning is just so great, because it does mean we can look way down the line.
I was just going to ask, regards to likes of gene therapies, RNA, etc., age restrictions in terms of, I think it's been a focus on younger patients, or whether it's actually something which should be open to older patients as well.
Brilliant question. Darren, it's more of a manufacturing developing question, I think.
I think I just caught your eye there, Sheila, and you wanted to give it to me. But so I think we talked about clinical trials. Not sure. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. talks about clinical trials, and originally with these conditions, you understand that it's prognosis. You're pre-symptomatic, then symptomatic. It happens very early, and then you pass a point of no return. So at the moment, with lots of conditions, unless you treat before the patient progresses past a certain clinical endpoint or a prognosis, it's irreversible. I think in certain treatments and conditions there are, and even in our therapy, there are older populations and older patients that would benefit as well. But I think at the moment, because of the disease progression and because of phenotypes and everything else, it's generally children, and once it's passed, there's no coming back. So I think that's something I would say from a manufacturer and just a biology perspective, and we need to address. Obviously, ongoing trials, if you get symptomatic patients and there is benefit, there are definitely options for treatment there as well.
Thanks so much. Huge thanks to our panel, who have hopefully provided you some real insights into the challenges of bringing these cell and gene therapies into the NHS, and hopefully it gives you a bit of education of how difficult it is, and it's not just a pill.